Hi everyone, welcome back. Now I look forward to see in fact what you've written. Now I will quickly go through some of the main general answers to the questions. But what it is you may have something else, and I really look forward to your input and comment from others to these input. Now we're in for the third video, and we will go a little bit more in depth with this. So what are the levels of comparison? National political systems and the state. That's something you can compare. Subnational, regional political system. There can be some differences within the states. There can be semi-independence or autonomy. Or, for instance, in the Danish Reign, we have two territories which is not part of, who have their own governments, and it's only in foreign politics and security that it's the Danish government who has overall power, but in the rest they have their own. That's the island of Greenland, where there's 58,000 inhabitants, and then it's the Faroe Islands, which is north of Great Britain, between Great Britain and Iceland. Then we have supranational units. It could be the European Union. It could be different kinds of regional cooperation. There's in South Asia. There is a different cooperation in different parts of Latin America. There's also OAS, the Organization of American States, and there is the trade cooperation between Mexico and United States and Canada. So one can compare these different kind of system. African Union we also have, but we don't have the Asian Union. We have the Union of Islamic States. So you can compare most of them. What's their history? What have they been? What are they doing? What can they do? And then, of course, in a way, you could also look at the United States as such a supranational unit. If you look at the different states as separate national units, but that's another story. Single elements or components of the political system, then you take some part out of it. It could be the election, it could be the public health, it could be the state and how it involves in relation to the market against monopoly. It could be how the labor market was organized. It can be almost whatever. Then it can get down to the individuals. How do we vote? Why do we vote? Why are there in some countries maybe more people voting than in other countries? And why do they vote for the parties that they do? Why do people vote against our objective interest? Why? Yeah, there's a lot of possible questions, and in relation to group, what people have organized, and that can be in relation to class, but also different business group. It can be ethnicity, it can be religion, it can be many different things. So also focus of comparative politics studies in comparative politics may focus on a small number of countries, two or more, or it may attempt to incorporate the analysis of a very large range of countries. Countries, in fact, need not to be the unit of analysis. subnational regional political units or supranational units may be the focus. And it's again, the last part is more down outside the United States, because the United States is more focused on difference between countries. Yes. And then here I introduced the comparative politics studies, and that's in fact a discussion about different approaches in relation to comparative politics studies and in relation to political science. What is compared? Political systems, regimes, organizations, institutions, formal and non-formal actors, social actors, processes, what take place, could also be tradition, practices, policies. Why compare, and what are principal purposes of studying comparative politics? That is to understand why we react the same or we act differently to sometimes to the same event. Again, I'll refer to the coronavirus, where not all the countries have reacted in the same way, or with the same speed, or with the same understanding. So that's and why are they doing it? It doesn't have an effect that they are doing the way they do. And then you can even see some countries that they react in the same way, even though the situations are different or the reasons for doing things are different, as the conditions are different in the countries. And in order, why to say that? Yeah, but take countries, poor countries. In United States, in Denmark, it's very much to control the pandemic. So in order to make the health system manage the pandemic and not collapse. But in poor countries where they don't have a functioning health system, will it make any difference? And if it will not make any difference, why do these poor countries do it anyway? And here I'm thinking very much about countries like Honduras and Zimbabwe. And then it's to put concept, situation in context and to evaluate. It's again sometimes it's about different concepts. Are they valid in different countries? It's again when we talk about public health, then it's not that everyone knows that this is in fact a public health system. It's a very abstract. So they are very different. These or when we talk about democracy, there are different understandings of democracy, and then a different disagreement on what the best democracy is and the best democracy for whom. Situation in context and to evaluate. That's also to compare situations. And again, I have to bring up this coronavirus. It's such an excellent phenomenon to study in relation to comparative politics. And it's going on just in the front of our eyes. And it's to develop generalization. It's to test theories. You have different theories. Does it fit? So in all democratic countries, it is like this and this and this. And then you find out, oh, there are some differences. For instance, nations and states, it's about nations. You need to have one language, and then you find that some countries, no, they exist, even though they have many different languages binding them together. So it's about to test theories. And then it's about to widen our understanding of politics in other countries. While we do that, then we reflect on the politics of our own country as well. So, and perhaps we get some impression or inspiration how to organize our society in a better way. Yeah, and that's in fact what I say here. It's to increase our appreciation of the advantages and disadvantages of our own political system, and to enable us to learn from other countries. See, to increase our appreciation. Yes, but what if one finds that our own political system sucks? It doesn't function. It's not capable of dealing with today's challenges, or it's unfair, or it's so it's to increase the understanding of the advantages of our political system. It is like our appreciation is that this is in fact the best system that we have. And I say that because I come from another country, and we may have different understanding of what the best is. And there's always flaws in whatever system which exists. To develop a more sophisticated understanding of politics in general, including the nature of democracy and non-democratic governments, the relationship between governments and people, and other concept process. So it is about just not having a superficial understanding, but more in-depth understanding of different elements. So, because there's a lot of superficial understanding in relation to, we don't know, we think we know when we use the word, democracy. Oh, yeah, but Zimbabwe is a democratic country as well. And then when you go into it, yeah, they have election once in a while, but they are not free and fair. And in fact, people don't trust the government at all in what they're doing. So it's about all understanding linkages between domestic and international affairs. So it's about the linkages, what happened in one and how, because none of the countries that we're living in are islands. We are influenced, we are trading, we're getting ideas, good and bad ideas from different countries, and they spread today very, very quickly. And we are so much linked together. It's in fact it's going to be interesting to see how it will be affected after the corona, where all the countries have been locking down, and in fact become much more introvert. And it's about everyone is its own. It's not about working together, but it's all about me and my country. In fact, with cooperation, we could in fact increase the quality of the intervention that the different countries are undertaking. So, and to enable us to become more informed citizens. So, and that's in fact very, very much important, particularly when I talk about the previous, when nationalism is coming up and it's on the run everywhere in the United States, but in many countries in Europe, it has become very, very strong as well. So, and we have had several wars due to nationalism. So it's in order to avoid this, then it's important that we are informed citizens, and we know that there's people that are different ways of organizing society, and it doesn't have to be bad. It's just different. And it's also about respecting others and others' belief in what would be the best society in a frame. So it's not free for all. To sharpen our critical thinking skills by applying scientific logic and coherent argument to our understanding. So it's about that's about the approaches and make it academic, and it's about critical thinking. It's not just about, oh, I feel it's like this. Why do you think that? Oh, I feel like this. There have to be some data behind, and it's again related to politics and nationalism. So much is about feeling. So you feel for somebody, but one thing is feeling and seeing, but it's important to how in fact see what is happening, and to have the data, because we are so misinformed in many different ways, particularly because a lot of our understanding is very superficial. So that is very much so we are reflecting, and we be able to, and the better knowledge that we have, the better our intervention will be to original and evaluation of comparative politics. Now Plato and Aristotle, they were not comparative politics, but they are the originators of political philosophy. So it's all the political science is starting from their time with, and it's in fact, one can also say about the differences where Plato, where he had the ideal understanding of society, and with that ideal, it was about getting society to be like this ideal. While Aristotle was completely different, it was much more realistic or related to realism. It's about societies, how is it, and how is the power balances, and how can it work, how it is, and then organize a good and effective society around this. So it's all for them. And then the constitution of political science as a discipline came much later, before it was integrated in the general academic. But it became a separate field of its own in the late part of the 1800s. That means in the 19th century. And there it became disciplines on more and more universities. Before it was economics, law, which was important. Then the behavioral revolution, which is called in the 90s of fiction. And then it was about how people behave. And it was very much about figures, making studies, cohorts, having big numbers, make big surveys, and then to make analysis based on these surveys. And it came very much about after the Second World War, where a lot of people were saying, all this about descriptive political science. So it was very much descriptive, and so it was not really useful for policymakers. So it was very much also like in a geography in relation to people. Then it was also about description and very little analysis. So that was how the behavioral revolution came. Then after this, there was some sort of a counter-revolution, which called the post-behavioral period, which was a criticism of behavioralism. It was about how all this it had to be figures, and it was again about comparative politics was supposed to use it was only good science if it was related to statistics and high numbers. So it was criticism because it was only focused on groups and big groups, ignored individual decision making, it ignored diversity, it ignored it was the big figure, and at the same time it was not capable of of understanding. It was not completely good in understanding, the differences. And then the second scientific revolution, it was a return to institution. There was so much more which meant different things. And this focus on institution, it was not only in political science, it was also in economy. It came in because you found out that there were so many things which couldn't be explored, explained by the normal way of investigating a society and the economy of a society. Why were some countries doing well despite they had completely the same objective conditions as others? And then came the return to institutions. So institution did the explanation, all the things which could not be explained in the traditional way, that it's about education, how to say economic development. You need education, you need to have resources, and so it became institutions, which was very broadly defined. By the late 1980s, then also it was about the state was very important. Before it was just about, it was the market, which was market would solve everything. That was also what the neoliberal time, and the market was solving everything. And then finding out, no, it was not solving everything. In fact, the state has a role to play. But this had enormous influence on international politics about what the international organizations told the developing countries how they should develop. And in fact, in many of the developed countries or the richer countries, they were not following it themselves. So the state became very important in the analysis. So there's different approaches to comparative politics. First approach, it's about you have particular problems in different countries and then you compare. Here it's again going back to the COVID-19. How does it evolve in different countries and how are we dealing with it? And what's in fact, what is the best way of dealing with it? Which we don't know yet. History will tell us. Then the second approach is an in-depth explanation of primary political process in a state or group of nations located in one region. So, what are the political processes taking place? Who are influencing the decisions in different countries? And how is it taking place? And here we have Arend Lipjert. He's a famous Dutch-American researcher. He's one of the grand old men in comparative politics. For him, it's not defined by the object of study, but rather by the method it applies to study political phenomena. So it's the method which is decisive in political comparative politics. It's not the object, but it's the method which is saying that it's comparative politics. Then we have another one, Peter Meyer and Richard Rose. They have a slightly different definition, arguing that comparative politics is defined by a combination of a substantive focus on the study of countries' political system and a method of identifying and explaining similarities and differences between these countries using common concepts. So they include both. So, and they don't say one is more important than others, but it's both. It's the substantive focus and the method in explaining similarities and differences. So And comparative politics can also be, that's another grand old man in comparative politics, Schmitter, an analytical effort to exploit similarities and differences between political units as a basis for developing theory, testing hypotheses, inferring causality, and producing reliable generalization. The comparison can be done in different ways depending on what to be analyzed and why it's analyzed. So in comparative politics, the focus of study is always compared with something else or something similar in another place. But it's never standing alone, as that would be just a one case study. There are many things to be learned by studying and comparing political system. That is how governments are structured and how they function. And in fact, the effects of this, the processes through which governments interact with the population in pursuing community goals. How are the governments related and interacting with its own population? And how political leaders and the population behave in politics. And here, during the Corona crisis, it's really very visible. Now I'll make the comparison again between Denmark and Honduras. In Denmark, we have a minority government with a prime minister, and she has been out very, from the beginning with really harsh measures, but people have to do it voluntarily. So it's not that police are in the street and saying, you cannot go to the street, you just have to restrict how many you are and things like that. And then to a large extent, people are following. And there's a lot of information, and we have our media, which is also discussing different things and things like that. But she's extremely popular in this time of, and people trust her. And so it's even political opponents, they trust her, they have faith in her, and she is very open with the differences which are there. And then in Honduras, where the president is trying in a way to copy the way, but don't understand, in fact, the effects of what's happening, that people, instead of dying of corona, they are dying of hunger because they cannot earn any money, there's no security system. So the poor people who earn daily wages, they cannot get out. So there's a lot of there, and people don't trust. And in fact, they have made studies. So every time he's on the television, the anxiety level is increasing. So it's having the opposite. And then everyone is sure that the money they've got in easy loans now from IMF, among one of them, it's going to be misused, like or most of the other funds who are going to the state. So say that's so people also behave differently vis-a-vis the political leaders. Then about how political leaders and the public think about feeling about politics and how their feelings affect their behavior. And there's a lot of traits in many different countries. So even though I mentioned before about Honduras, where people really have it discussed with the government and the politicians there, then in fact this discuss is something you find in all countries in the United States, when some people talk about the swamp in Washington, and you cannot trust the politicians and all these issues without respecting, in fact, that many of them, in fact, are trying to do quite a good job. And we have the same sentiments in Denmark. So it's a sentiment that you find in most society, and also in democratic societies. But it's very important that they, in a way, they're contained, and a lot of how to deal with these sentiments, and because there are a lot of things and bad things and wheeling dealing taking place, but in one way that's also part of politics. So, and what do we have as alternative. Winston Churchill, he said that democracy is a terrible, terrible system. It's so terrible, but it's the best we got. So it's also, what is the alternative to our political system? By studying and comparing these different aspects of different politics, we're able to learn more about the system in which we live. Again, we can also determine which systems are successful and which systems are not. And it's again successful, and it's again according to who. If we go to Honduras, yeah, but for those who are in power and who manage the system and rig the elections and keep in power and just secure them and theirs, I think they may say it's very successful, but for the majority, it is definitely not. And it does have implication on other countries. A lot of the migrants coming from Honduras to United States, it's just because they don't have any other alternative than going to this terrible travel to United States. How do we compare? We can use theory and hypothesis. We can have cause and effect relationship using variables, something that can vary or change. It can take different forms or be changeable characters of a phenomenon. Dependent variables dependent on others for its outcome. Examples could include country behavior, groups, process, policy making, individual a big emphasis on voting. This kind is a voting behavior. So it's again, if we do this, will this happen? And then independent variable, the factor that explains the outcome we observe. Why does it happen? And then we have some data, and then we argue why we think that is that's the case. Variables, it can also be multi-party politics, where you look at what's having an effect on these. If you do like this and that, what will happen? Correlation, association between two variables versus causation. And always when you make these things, it's also about it's not all association which are relation. So you can in fact having some data which is in association and follow each other. So there is a correlation, but there's no interrelations at all. It's accidental. Most similar system design, that's another. It's again saying you take some systems which look very much alike. You can take the Scandinavian countries which have systems which are very similar, and then you can compare them, and then you'll find out there's quite a lot of differences in these systems. And then you can have extreme cases, most different system design. And then you go through the system and say, in fact, see what are the similarity in these countries. Are there any similarities, and how does they affect the outcome in this society, the structure of this society, and more the outcome. Framework of comparison, levels of analysis. We talk often about micro level analysis, meso and macro, and then you in fact can talk about, I would say, interregional, where you have the EU and African Union and OAS, something like that. But the macro level, then you look at the state level. Meso level is more on region, or you take subsections in the countries. And micro, then you really go down to to smaller things. And it can also be, you take one thing like trust, and then you look at trust in different societies. So it can also be, you can have these levels, but some of the levels in a way, they can also be cross-cutting. Research traditions. This is some levels, labels on some of the research traditions. Rational choice perspectives. That it's very much about the argument that we all do. What's rational and the best for us. Of course, there's a lot of discussions on these issues. What is the best? Seemingly there are differences, and even among different kinds of studies. So economists, they are acting more according to rational choice than the rational choice perspective than others. Then you have the cultural approach. Some also call it, part of that is a relativistic approach or postmodernistic approach, where you're distancing this, saying that this is in fact not always the case. And then you have the structural approach, or the post-structural approach. It's also studying institutions, be more about the structures and less on the individual, or then it's the relationship between the individuals and the structures. Yeah. Framework to compare. So it's political system, it's the environment of this political system, and then the interdependence of these political systems. And then it's about strong structure and function. So it's about how do they function? You have this structure, and how do they function? You have democratic system, this is the structure, and how does it function? Summing up, comparative politics is part of political science. It is both a broad research field and a meta. In US, comparisons between countries outside broader is often between countries alone. It's not always the case, but it's very normal. And then outside the United States, it's also include broader territories or entities. Look at differences or similarities, levels of studies, research traditions, having different research traditions, which are very similar to, the research tradition in political science. So if you have any questions in relation to this presentation, then contact me directly or write open in a discussion on Canvas. So you have read 2 articles of today, which discuss the necessity of conceptual clarity in relation to the concept of democracy. These articles, we'll discuss them in depth later. So, but they will now act as inspiration for the next discussion. Think about the concept and that's very much about the concept. Think about the concept you're using. Are they helping us understand, or are they confusing us? In order to understand each other, it's very important that we have the same language. And now we're not talking about English, but that in fact, when we use a different concept, that it means the same for both of us. Otherwise, we'll have to say, oh, when he talks about democracy, he means this and this. When she talks about democracy, she means it. And it becomes complicated. And it's already complicated because in relation to different countries, they often have different understanding of sometimes the same concept. So instead of democracy, we will discuss the coronavirus and how countries have dealt with it and affected by it. So coronavirus, we will not let it go. And it's about comparing national public health system in light of corona. We are bombarded with information on the spread of the virus and the effects of the virus in our own countries. We compare it, how it develops, in other countries and how it's dealt with. You can just go into, I can go into my public television and they have a lot of data which is coming every day. You can go into the BBC, they have data and they update it so everyone know what's happening in this country and in that country, how many on the hospital respirator or ventilators, how many are infected. So every day we see this, the figures, and we get a lot of explanation. We are, and it's not only political scientists or public health scientists, it's the whole society. And for some, it's very important because then our understanding, so we will understand why the people in government, they take the decisions that they are taking. And it is difficult because our knowledge on the pandemic is changing on the way. We are getting wiser and wiser every day. So the pandemic highlights the strength and weaknesses of the different national and public health systems. We see that countries have addressed it in different ways. But even though who are more liberal, in the end, they all seem to head towards restrictive responses. So where we are drastically limited our freedoms. We are being kept, we are in quarantine, we have to stay inside. The countries doesn't know, the cooperation between countries are going down, diminishing. Our country is locked down. You're not allowed, you're not expect to travel only if it's really necessary or deadly necessary. So it's again, the questions are very much, why should we compare how different countries address the coronavirus? And you should give at least one reason for why we should compare. And you should not just, you should write whole sentences, but more than one. What should we then compare? What's interesting to compare? What's level, what institutions, and it can be many different things. So come up with at least one here also, but I think you should come up with several why we should compare. And can we now say something about how best to approach the pandemic? And finally, is the single payer system the best as indicated by the article below? It's again in the developed on the world, we often talk about the single payer system where we have a unified public health system, or we have another one where it's more of a private model where the private hospital system is prevalent, and there it is very much are one of them better than the other one? So that's the last. And if they are, why are they better than the other ones? And I have to say that when we talk about single payer system and for profit model, then in fact in most countries it is a mixed. In Denmark it is also mixed. All our general practitioners, they are private, but they are cooperating with the state. We do have some few private hospital, but the core of our public health system is in fact the public hospitals and yes. And there is an article you can read, and it's very fast read. So do the assignment in Canvas. You'll see the others after you have done it yourself. You are encouraged, spelling check again. Yeah, you are encouraged to ask questions and comment. I will attend to the comments the first session after the deadline of today's class. If you have any questions for me, send me a mail in Canvas. End of video 3 and session 1. Good luck and see you again on Friday. Yes.